right, I'd like to call to order the RTM committee meetings for April 11th, 2022. And we'll start with Alex Durrell's going to do the pledge here for us tonight. So let's stand.
All rise, please. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, and liberty
with justice for all. Amen.
I think he almost forgot it.
I'll do the national anthem next time.
You'll definitely forget the words to that. That's an easy thing to do.
Thank you. All right.
All right. So we're going to get started. So remember, I'd like to see everybody. Please just stay on camera if you can. And if you want to ask a question or speak, please put your name in the chat. So number one tonight, we're going to have, we'll start with the nurses contract, item number 3 on our agenda. And we have Jim Hazelkamp here and Attorney George. I saw Attorney George. Jim, are you here?
I just saw a message from Jim that he's having some difficulty logging in.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable, Courtney, presenting?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. If you don't mind, let me just send him a message letting him know that I've seen his email, and I'll be right with you.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to present on these two collective bargaining agreements that we have negotiated with 2 of the town's unions. One is with the Nurses Union, the other is with the Professional and Technical Employees Association. So I believe that everyone has received summaries of the terms that were sort of the central terms that were negotiated, and also copies of sort of the draft agreements that that both the union and the town will be reviewing for approval. So the sort of the key economic terms with respect to the nurses agreement would be the term, which is a 4-year term going through from 2020 to 2024. The proposed wage increases, which are 2.25% retroactive, 2.25% retroactive, and then 2.5% and 2.5% in the 3rd and 4th years. The health insurance contributions for the nurses unit will be 16%, 16%, 16.5%, and then 17% in the final year. And then there were a number of different provisions that were sort of addressed and reviewed with the nurses. And just by way of background, I would say this, the nurses agreement in particular, this was an agreement which required a lot of review and a lot of discussion, and there were a number of revisions and clarifications that were made. So by comparison to the professional and technical unit, you probably saw that the documents that we submitted were a little bit more extensive and involved more provisions. With the unit, there will be an elimination of a health insurance buyout option. Currently, under the contract, employees can waive health insurance and get a lump sum payment. If they do so, going forward, they will remain eligible to waive out of health insurance if they have proof of other coverage, but the lump sum payment will be eliminated except for employees who currently are getting it. They will have an opportunity to continue, but if and when they ever kind of opt back into the insurance, then that would end and they would no longer be eligible for the buyout after that. Another big item with respect to the nurses unit was with respect to the OPEB. So I think it's important to just highlight that. The nurses were one of the only units actually paying into the OPEB, and I think they were paying in at the highest level. This was an item of contention for the unit, and ultimately in addressing this with them, the terms that were discussed were to, they will continue to be eligible to participate in OPEB, but their employee contributions will end as of March 31. At that time, they have an opportunity to elect a buyout, in which case they would get paid back the contributions that they have made through March 31, but they would not be then eligible to re-enter OPEB after that. And then we negotiated several other opportunities for employees to opt out of the OPEB, either on on retirement, and then if they leave employment before qualifying for retirement, they would actually get their contributions refunded without interest. And we, the other, changes are outlined, but I just kind of wanted to touch on those. If there are any questions about the terms or sort of the provisions that are presented in the draft, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Ms. George. Do we have any questions? Mr. Bateson, Representative Bateson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, through you to Courtney. I just want to clarify what I'm hearing on OPEB. They're going to stop contributing to OPEB. On what basis? They've contributed too much, or bargaining units aren't contributing? I'm confused as to why we're ending it.
Correct. So that's an excellent question. And it appears that when the last contract was negotiated, the nurses were one of the only units to actually agree to contribute into OPEB. I believe that the police and fire may also contribute, but the remaining units do not. And with respect to police and fire, I think the terms were more favorable than to the nurses, and the nurses also, for them, essentially they were underwater with respect to their OPEB contributions, in the sense that unlike police and fire, they don't have the same income earning opportunities, the same overtime opportunities, and the cost for them to contribute was significant relative to their compensation. And sort of where they were and their insurance contributions. So it was a real source of contention for them. They felt that that they had been led to believe that all units would be participating at the same level that they were, and that for whatever reason did not happen in the last round of negotiations, which were completed by other parties. So this was a way to kind of bring them forward. They're able to continue to participate. But the other thing about it was that there were some people who wanted to be able to continue to participate. There were others who felt that this was sort of a suppressant for recruitment, because there may be people coming in sort of like kind of at the outset of their careers who may or may not stay with the town of Fairfield throughout their careers, and that this was a cost that they were bearing that they didn't feel they would be able to benefit from, and in the long run, and there was no sort of refund option either. So in order to kind of equalize them with other units that were not contributing, and to address the concerns that they had with respect to their income, this was a compromise position.
Okay, can they go back, follow up here, since they're not going to be contributing, that's only in effect for this agreement. So in other words, 2 years out from now, if it's determined that the OPEB liability, we need them to contribute, that can come back around, correct? That discussion can be opened once this agreement is open for renegotiation, correct?
So one could come back and revisit it, but not during the term of this contract.
Okay. One more follow-up. I see on your summary sheet here. Okay, retiree health, eliminate retiree health insurance for all employees hired after April 2022. So we're closing OPEB benefits for new hirees?
Yes.
Is this the only bargaining agreement that's doing this?
I
To your
am not
knowledge.
involved in, if Jim were here, he would probably be better able to respond to that, but I'm not involved in all of the negotiations for the contracts, but I believe that is the case.
Okay.
Can I interrupt? I am actually
Mr.
not-
Hazelkamp is here, so.
Sorry. I wasn't able to join because I couldn't figure out how to log in, and I apologize for that. So the OPEB, the termination of eligibility for OPEB, this would be the only bargaining unit that doesn't have retiree health insurance.
Okay. All right.
In essence, as you just articulated, we allowed them to waive and not pay into the OPEB trust. And part of the trade-off was an insistence that we close retiree health insurance for prospective nurses going forward.
Okay, that's what I thought I read. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you, Jim.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you, Representative Bateson. Representative Carson?
Hi, Laura Carson, District 4. I'm just a little confused. Why are the nurses having to pay a higher contribution into the OPEB compared to everyone else?
They were paying what was negotiated in the last round.
But what was the rationale? Why would they be subject? And they're not getting compensated like the others, like fire or police, because they can't do overtime. Why would they have to do that? I'm just trying to understand that. Do you have any idea? Why would they agree to it? That's
So-
Can I take a crack at that, Courtney?
Sure, if you'd like to, Jim.
Sure. I think that there's, like every negotiations, I think there was a concern that the nurses had where they ended up avoiding some other issue and traded off paying into the OPEB trust. And, you know, how that evolved is I think, upsetting to the nurses. The nurses, I believed, thought that we would then do the same thing with the rest of the bargaining units. Because that didn't occur, as Courtney had outlined, that was a very burdensome issue in the negotiations. So, you know, why they negotiate was before either Courtney or I were involved. I talked to their rep, who basically said, well, the town said they were going to do it for everybody, and then the town didn't do that. So it put the nurses in the position of being in a unique position relative to retiree medical. And we've tried to rectify that.
okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative Carson. Anybody else? Representative
Point of
Bateson.
Information, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Bateson had a follow-up question.
I'll yield to the point of order.
Thank you.
Well, sorry, it's a point of information. When I was reviewing the materials, I was very confused because we're typically given a memorandum that explains all of the details of the negotiating unit and how many employees there are in it, very specific details. Like I went back to our past contract reviews, and we were presented with very different information. You know, we usually get memos of like 10 pages identifying where the contract was before, where it is now, all these different, very, very granular details. And I'd like to ask if our council can go back and do that. I don't know why we've been given that in the past, and we got a very Spartan review this time. It was hard to follow, honestly. I'm a lawyer, and I thought it was kind of unintelligible.
So if additional information is needed, certainly we can go back and provide that. Ordinarily, the detail of the negotiations would not be provided in an open session, simply because that's typically not something that is part of sort of a public meeting. But if there are questions about that, then we can certainly go back and provide additional information.
Okay, I'd love to follow the structure that either attorney, I think his name, Attorney Soder follows from the Board of Ed, or I found past contracts on the town side too that have a very standard memorandum, and they give us a lot more information, and they're in public meeting. They're presented to us in a public meeting format. So maybe I can send that format to you, and you can follow that. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Vergara. Representative Bateson, thanks for being patient.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Quick thing, are we discussing bin managers or PETA also, or is that coming after this? I didn't really, are we taking both at the same time?
I think Attorney George kind of fed both in there, but I wanted to start with the nurses first and then move on to the PETA. So
It's fine. I'll hold off. My question was for PETA, so I'll hold on until you open that.
okay. Are there any other questions about the nurses? I guess I have a couple of questions. I guess back to Representative Vergara's point, how many nurses are in this bargaining unit?
So, Jim.
Yeah, it fluctuates because you have to remember, this is not just the full timers. This is also the part timers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's in the 50s. It fluctuates because of the part timers.
Okay.
So that, really almost half the bargaining unit is part timers. And then there's, a nurse per school and a couple extras.
Right. And this contract, their last contract expired in 2020?
20, yep.
And when was that last contract negotiated? This is a 4-year contract. Was the last one a 4-year contract as well?
I believe it was, give me 1 minute. The last one was,
and I guess my other question was, why'd this take almost 2 years? And you're probably going to tell me COVID, right? But
there were delays. The initial negotiations were delayed due to COVID. Then what happened was that it took a longer because there were a lot of there were a lot of very poorly drafted provisions in the existing contract. There were many areas where it was very difficult to comprehend. It was creating a number of different administrative complexities for human resources to sort of administer this contract. And time was spent actually sitting down with the union in an off-the-record collaborative process to actually review and begin to try to work through some clarifications in the contract that actually were apart from sort of the strict negotiations. And that was because both parties recognized that there were a number of areas in the contract where it was unintelligible, difficult to understand, and the parties themselves weren't always clear about what was supposed to be happening under certain provisions. So time was actually taken out to do that. One of the components of the document that was negotiated is to actually is a sort of a memorandum of agreement that recognizes that the parties want to continue sort of that collaborative process because short of just redrafting the entire contract from scratch, the best way to do it, we felt, was through this sort of mutual voluntary process. So that took some additional time.
okay. And did you find when that other contract was?
I did not, and I apologize for that. I have that for the professional and technical, but it looks like the other contract was negotiated in 2013. So I will check, but I imagine it was around the same time.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so if we could move into the PETA contract.
Sure. So
it's a little different. It's 3 years, right? And
correct. So with the PETA contract, this was actually negotiated sort of through a process between Jim and the union. And the sort of the focus here was a little different. It was on sort of extending the contract and building in some additional terms. So the parties did not have necessarily a full-fledged, set of negotiations. They'll return in 2023 to review and revisit provisions of the contract for additional updates. But in the interests of bringing the contract current and also negotiating some changes, the parties were able to do that sort of amicably and through this set of discussions. So here the term is a 3-year contract. It's 2% retroactive in the first year, 2.25% retroactive in the second year, and then it would be 2.5% in the third year. There would be a one-time signing bonus, and the health insurance contributions are 16. It should actually be 17 in the first half of the year and then 17 for the third year. With respect to the health insurance, they will also have a buyout, sort of elimination of the lump sum buyout, but they'll be able to continue waiving. And then from sort of an administrative standpoint, there were some adjustments to the timing of new hire benefits, so that going forward, vacation benefits and certain other benefits will be available for new hires, essentially from the first month of their employment.
Sorry, I was muted. Representative Bateson, did you want to ask your question now?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Quick thing, I guess, I'll say HR. I'm looking at this. I see a change in the 401A where we're adjusting contribution match. We were at 4%, we're going to 5%, and we're shortening the vesting period. Is that something we're going to see more of in the 401As, or was this plan shorted in that, or what's the flavor? What's going on here?
So it's, excuse me, it's not actually a change. The administration, since I first got here, was contributing 5%. So it's to bring it up to what in fact was being provided across the board to the folks that have participated in the 401A. And then the vesting schedule was to make the vesting schedule consistent across the organization.
Okay,
It's
so
not actually costing, it's not costing more because the town had, I don't know at what point, gone to 5% before I got here.
okay.
So we're just cleaning up the language basically on that. It's not a substantive change.
Yeah, I know. That's a little concerning that we would be giving more than what's allowed under the contract. I hope we're not doing that in any other areas. I'd ask your department to keep an eye out on that, because if the agreement says 4%, that's where we should be. I just don't think there should be no mechanism that allows to give more that's in the contract. Am I right in saying that there is no way to do that unless it's approved?
That should be the case, yes.
Okay. I believe that should be the case too. So in your position as HR, I really want you guys to stay on top of this stuff and make sure that stuff like this is not happening. Because I mean, I understand your explanation, but to me, the explanation is not acceptable because it doesn't agree with the previous contract. So please pay attention to that stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bateson. Representative Georgiadis. No, sorry, Bastilli is first.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sharon Pastilli, District 3. I have a question. What is the prior term of the PETA contract? So this one is 3 years. What was the term of the prior one?
So the prior contract looks like it was from July 1, 2013.
So
2020.
Okay, so that was a 7-year contract. So why is this contract a different term?
So contract terms can be negotiated, subject, they don't have to constantly be the same. But in this particular case, the focus was on the fact that the contract expired in 2020, and there was an interest in bringing it current, so that there would be an opportunity to sit down and have more full-blown, robust negotiations in the near future without having to be too far retroactive.
Got it. Yeah, because 2 years already passed then. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right. Got it. That makes sense. And then I took a look at the Appendix A on page, it's like PDF page 42 of our packet, and it's document page 29. Appendix A, the salary and grade classifications. And I tried to like compare them to what's in the budget book, and it didn't exactly like line up to what's in the budget book. Like I didn't see any, there are no HR positions in here. Is that correct?
They're not in the union.
So the HR positions are not in the union at all?
That's correct.
Okay, and then I took like I made a list. Just bear with me 1 second. I apologize because I'm flipping between a PDF and a
Well,
Excel
I can
spreadsheet.
probably save you the exercise. There will be a update of the appendix that will reflect the job titles that are not updated yet. So
Okay, so like it seems like there's a bunch of IT jobs that were like in the budget book that aren't in PETA, so they're going to be in the new appendix when it's finalized.
yes, there's
Okay.
there's a series of those types of positions that for some reason the job titles don't match exactly. And it's my goal to have the appendix match the current makeup of the town so that the job titles match the head count.
Okay, but so in the end, the appendix will be consistent with what we see in the budget book, so we'll be able to track like who's union and who's non-union and like what grades they're in, like in the budget book.
I can't speak to the budget book because I don't put that together. I can tell you that the job titles and the step and grades should match. What happens historically, and this is a good example, where the contract was 6 or 7 years old, there are all kinds of changes that happen in that period that get reflected in the updated wage grid. So that's an exercise that we'll go through before we sign the actual contract.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Representative Pastilli. Thank you, Representative Georgiadis, for letting Representative Vergara skip ahead here.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jill Vergara for District 7. Jim, you were planning on revising the Appendix A because it looked like it was revised this time around, like it's redlined, but you were
there's one, it's only redlined, maybe there's two. It was redlined because we actually upgraded somebody in the negotiations, so that's reflected there. It's not reflected for all the different job changes and job title changes that have happened in the last 7 years or 6 years.
Okay, because I was confused. I didn't compare Appendix A to the budget book, but I compared Appendix A to what we were given in 2017 because I was on the body pen and I was able to take the copy out with my edits in it. And there was a completely different type of list of all of the positions in the PETA union. And so I compared it and there were a lot additional, and I don't know if you want me to go through them. And there were several that were taken out, but how does that happen where in the interim of the contract passing and one not being negotiated, not having been approved, that there are already additions to the appendix from the last version?
Yeah, I mean, when any position gets created that's not in the grid from the start of the contract to whenever it expires, there's a negotiation with the union about the placement of the salary for a given position that might be added to the budget. So that's goes on for every year that there's a new budget that changes a title or changes, adds a position or subtracts a position. That would happen during the time of the 6 or 7 year contract. So it's not going to be reflected in the contract at this point until we clean it up.
Okay, but this is going to be cleaned up by the time we vote on it, or
There's no reason to vote. Those changes are already done, so it's not part of the negotiations.
I guess it was useful for me to have that list when Mr. Hibson presented it to us, because he was very specific about how many people were in PETA and how many people were in the different pay grades. And so I guess maybe I'll send you this model, because it was a really healthy memo, and he actually had sent us 2 memos on this labor contract. So
Yeah, you can certainly send it. I'll take a look at it. You know,
okay.
what he didn't do, which we've done to try to be transparent, is provide you with the entire document. I look back at what was presented to the boards in the past. They were not complete documents that was presented. So we spent a lot of time putting together large packages for you that show every change in the contract. That was not done in the past.
It's just really hard to figure out what the baseline terms are the way it's presented right now, I think. So it's helpful to have those tables where we see how many people are in each of the bargaining units, and how the pay grades are changing. To get those tables are really helpful. So, and I just wanted to know, how many open contracts are there in the town right now?
Well, we've settled these 2, and we had settled the ECC. So open is the remaining contracts, which is the THEA bargaining unit, which is the clerical, the DPW, the fire, and the police contracts. I think I have them all.
Okay, and
So basically all of them are open, except for the ones that you folks have just recently approved.
okay, so that's 4, and then you just mentioned 3 that were negotiated, and these 2 are before us right now.
Yeah.
So that's 7 total. That's a really, really high number of contracts to be open, and I understand that that we were in a pandemic, and it seems a little excessive to have that number of contracts open at this time. It seems like a big liability for our town. So I hope going forward, our HR can get them done a little bit more quickly. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't understand the liability, but we'll let that go. I don't see any particular liability in the fact that the contract won't pass the reclamation.
It's just a lot of unknown costs for us, and they all hit us all at one time.
It's in the budget.
Thank you, Representative Vergara. Representative Georgiadis.
Hi, Drew Georgiadis, District 9. This is an unfamiliarity on my part. Can you please explain to me when it says eliminate health insurance buyout option, what are the buyouts, and why are they so important to be mentioned over and over again?
So in both of these contracts, the existing contracts included an opportunity for employees who would otherwise be eligible to participate in the town's health insurance to opt out, and, provided they had other qualifying coverage. And in addition to opting out, receiving a sort of lump sum buyout payment. So it's not a true $1 to dollar buyout, but it's essentially a contract benefit that was negotiated at some point in the past, so that if an employee had alternate health insurance, they could say, yep, I'm not going to take town health insurance, and instead I'll take this lump sum payment. So going forward,
Lump sum annually or lump sum at the time of a hire?
So no, it's not at the time of hire. Every year, there's an opportunity to enroll in health insurance.
I
There's also an
understand that.
opportunity, on qualifying events. So it's kind of the annual sort of opt-out. And they would then receive this payment, which would actually be paid out over the year, but it would be a fixed amount. So it's a negotiated amount that they would receive if they waived out of health insurance. Going forward, they can waive out of the health insurance, but they won't receive the payment to do that.
So no longer will they get the lump sum.
Correct. Unless they currently, if, for example, somebody who has exercised that option, currently, if they have exercised that on March 31, then they would be eligible to continue to make that election in years going forward until such time as they opt into the insurance. And then at that point, they would be able to opt out in the future, but they would no longer get the payment. So there's kind of a grandfathered set of employees who can continue to elect sort of the payment option, but for everyone else, it will be closed.
Why are they grandfathering? Presumably these people are at a higher pay scale and possibly qualify for the pension versus the defined contribution. So, and is that number fixed, or does that lump sum increase annually year to year to year?
No, it's a fixed amount.
For the duration of their grandfather eligibility.
Correct.
I'm not sure if I agree with grandfathering it, but thank you for the explanation.
Thank you, Representative Georgiadis. Representative Zesman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Liz Esmond, District 4. So I have a question. I don't know if it's for probably Courtney and Jim. You know, we're going to be voting on the budget, and there may be some changes in positions or new positions. Is there any reason to hold off on approving this contract until that time? I mean, what is the possible effect of approving it now and then having other changes?
So, I mean, I don't know, Jim, if you want to answer that question in particular, these are going to be fixed numbers. A number of these years, at least the first 2 years of each contract is retroactive. So those sort of amounts were already the budgeted amount. I believe they were within the budgeted amount. So going forward, there will be an opportunity if there's something that is not yet budgeted to address that in the budget.
Okay, thank you. Jim, is there any thoughts on your part from the HR perspective? You're muted, Jim.
Sorry. I mean, the way this process works is you're voting to fund the contract, and the contract, from what I understand, is budgeted in contingency for the past years. And I don't believe that the settlement is going to be beyond what's in the budget for this year.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative Zesman. Are there any other questions from the body? All right, count it to 10. Thank you, Attorney George and Mr. Hazelkamp. And
I just say one thing.
sure.
I just want to thank you for allowing us to put the PETA contract on such short notice, because I think some of you may know there's some folks that are trying to retire, and this affected their retirement dates. So that's why we requested that it be considered this month. And I just wanted to thank your allowance for that.
Sure. Not a problem.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Number 2 on the list tonight is on our agenda as number 6, the Commerce Drive Bridge. Mr. Bill Hurley, repeat offender.
Thanks. I'm just trying to click this on here. There we go. Yeah, the request is for the town to accept and expend funds for the Commerce Drive Bridge commitment to fund letter and project authorization letter. The bridge is located along Commerce Drive over the Ash Creek in the vicinity of the Infinity and Land Rover dealerships on the Bridgeport line. The design plans are nearing completion. The proposal includes all rights of way, and that's what's before us here is the right of way agreement. And let's see here. This proposal includes the right of way phases, which would be title searches, appraisals, payments for temporary construction easements and permanent easements on the abutting properties, legal fees, and any other items that need to adhere to the lot zip procedures to ensure the funding. This is a 100% reimbursable grant, and the town can utilize contingency for each phase of the right of way, and then submit reimbursements for each phase as well. The project authorization letter will reimburse the town the right of way costs up to $200,000. If for some reason the costs are more, we just have to go back to the MetroCog and to the state and request for additional funding, which MetroCog in preliminary discussion said should not be an issue if that ever occurred. But we feel that the proposal does already have like a 20% contingency, so we think we're in good shape with this $200,000 figure. And I'm here to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. To the body for any questions here on this item. All right, Mr. Hurley, I think you're free to go tonight.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for everything. Okay. We have 2 items here coming up. WPCA microgrid and compost agitator and dolly. Mr. John Bodie, you here, sir?
I am here.
Okay. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. The first item up is $120,000 to finish the microgrid project. The microgrid was designed in 2015 on the heels of all the trouble from Sandy. It is a design to run the treatment plant on generator power without need for outside fuel deliveries. The town obtained a $2.8 million HUD grant to fund the project. Subsequently, the fire training complex, dog pound, and conservation workshop were added, as well as the photovoltaic panels that had been installed on each building. The photovoltaic was completed under a separate project. These were not part of the original design, so additional labor, programming, and equipment needed to be added to the design to incorporate the 3 buildings. We also are adding the 400 kW fuel cell that is on the WPCF site as well. The microgrid programming needs to be able to have input as well as control over all electric loads and power generating equipment to function as designed. This also protects UI equipment and their workers. And this money is coming fully from the WPCA fund balance. And I am here to answer any questions on this part.
Okay, thank you. Representative Bateson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Quick thing. I saw this item on the Board of Finance. I just want to clarify that these dollars are coming around because when Yankee Electric went back on site, we decided to hook up more buildings, the new fire center, the dog pound, and all that stuff, and that wasn't in the original project. So that's the reason for this extra appropriation. Is that correct?
100% correct.
Okay, now it has nothing to, I was a little confused when I heard the discussion at the Board of Finance. So this has nothing to do with the solar panels, or the solar panels, it just provided extra work that had to be tied in?
That's correct. The microgrid needs to see the solar panels, and seeing that the solar panels weren't part of the original design, there needed to be interconnections from the microgrid to the solar panels.
Okay, now the fuel cell, is that something new also that had to be figured in, or was that
Yep,
already
that's
there?
another addition. That's another addition. That fuel cell was installed 2018 or so. And again, not part of the original design, so it needs to be incorporated.
Okay, I don't imagine Jared Schmidt is on the call, but John, do you have any idea what the balance in the WPCA surplus account is?
I believe one of the meetings, it was 13.7 million,
13.7.
give or take.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bateson. Are there any other questions for Mr. Bodie regarding this item? All right, Mr. Bodie, let's go on to the compost agitator and dolly.
Okay. The town WPCF processes its sludge via the compost process, and that's been happening since 1989. Our sludge is mixed with yard waste supplied by We Care Denali, which is free of charge, and loaded into the bays that are 210 feet long, 6 bays total. The agitator mixes and moves the material 10 feet a day. Temperature is monitored as it progresses to ensure proper destruction of bacteria. The end product is transferred to We Care Denali, where it cures, is tested, screened, and sold. The present agitator is 16 years old and nearing the end of its useful life. The previous 3 machines that we had all lasted around the same time, and it's just due to the harsh and corrosive environment. And the lead time for the new machine is 48 weeks. If we were unable to compost, we would require to truck our sludge to one of 3 incinerators in Connecticut. A partially dried sludge would be most desirable, but there isn't a facility with capacity to take our sludge at this time. If we were to get in somewhere, yearly cost is estimated at $585,000. We could also truck liquid, but that requires more truckloads. We would be trucking out 6 days a week, and that estimated yearly cost is over $1 million. And again, this is all funded by the WPCA fund balance. And again, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bodie. Questions from the body? Nobody wants to learn more about sludge? Mr. Bateson, I think you popped in, right? Yes.
Yeah, quick thing. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John, are you long time down at the WPCF?
It'll be 30 years next month.
Okay, I remember years ago when we had 2 agitators. We had two bays that did this, and it was a big decision at that time. I don't know, 16 years ago, it was a big decision that we only went to 1. Do we regret that decision? Do we need to? Or is this function? I mean, what I'm seeing here is that I read this material and I have no choice. I got to replace this thing. I have no backup other than to, ship it off site. So do we regret going down to 1?
I don't believe so. With two in the building, it was kind of tight. When we did have 2, they seemed to equally decay at the same time, so to speak. So I don't think we regret it. We had 2 machines originally in '89. We replaced it with 1 in '06. And we've been running with 1 since then, so.
Okay, so on your backup material also, BDP, you might not have put this together. BDP expenditures 2017 through 2022, and it has a dollar amount each year. Am I to assume that these dollar amounts are what it's cost to service that agitator, the one that's there now?
Yes, service and repair, correct.
Okay. All right, what kind of warranty these guys offer?
I don't think they offer anyone. I don't think it's in the documents that there is a warranty. I will say that they are probably one of the best companies we've ever had to deal with. They're relatively close. They always seem to have parts in stock, and they're always willing to send somebody down and get us out of a jam. So,
Okay. And you guys down at the WPCA, I assume they're sticking to this policy that we make this commitment. We're continuing to compost for the next 16 to 20 years. That's where we want to be. We don't want to be in the business of shipping this off site.
we don't want. There's no place to go with it. Trucking cost, fuel, and everything. I think we're in good position composting for the next 16 years plus.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bateson. Any other members of the body? All right, Mr. Bodie, thank you very much. Your time is finished with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Item number 4 tonight, number 8 on our agenda, to consider and act upon a sense of the body resolution regarding racism as a public health crisis. And we have several presenters, Marcy Spolier, Sharon Pastilli, Ryan Odenak, and Doug Bennell with us tonight. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll start. Marcy Spolier, District 4. I brought this to the body as elected leaders. It's our privilege to represent all people in our community. This includes listening to members of our town regarding their experiences in Fairfield and responding in ways to make Fairfield a better place for all. In January, I listened to the members of the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force present their blueprint for the town of Fairfield. The committee spent 18 months identifying racial and ethnic inequalities and injustices in our town and provided recommendations to address them. After hearing and reading the blueprint, it was clear that there were immediate actions that we could take to improve the quality of life for all those in Fairfield. I believe the RTM can contribute to those actions, and the first step is to adopt a resolution that acknowledges the existence and impact of a combination of systems that disadvantage Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and access and opportunity in Fairfield, and commits to addressing racial equity and justice in town governance and town operations. By passing this sense of the body resolution, we signal solidarity with residents of color. We hold ourselves accountable to look at our town ordinances, our budget, our committee appointments, to make the way we govern more equitable for all. I urge all my RTM colleagues to stand with me in supporting this sense of the body resolution, declaring racism as a public health crisis. And I'm going to pass it over to my co-sponsor, Sharon.
Thank you, Marcy. Sharon Pastilli, District 3. I wanted to thank the members of the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force for their time and effort in examining the difficult issues and charting a path forward for the town of Fairfield. And in particular, I wanted to highlight one section of the resolution. Whereas racism unfairly disadvantages specific individuals and communities while unfairly giving advantages to other individuals and communities, and saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. The modernization of our governments has been a topic of discussion throughout many aspects of the town, including various departments, commissions, and even the structure of our elected bodies. Modernization of our government and of our town also means that we need to make racial equity a priority so that all residents of Fairfield have a feeling of belonging and are able to achieve their full potential. The pandemic has shown us in stark terms inequality that exists in our society, and we have the opportunity and the moral imperative to take action. Organizations who make inclusion a priority are more successful because they were able to solve problems using a diversity of thoughts and ideas, and as a result are more successful and resilient. Recognizing racism as a public health crisis is a first step to making positive change, modernizing our town, and will make the sum of us as a whole more successful, healthier, and more resilient as well. And now I'd like to hand it over to Ryan and to Doug to present. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug Bunnell, and I'm here with my colleague and fellow task force member Ryan Odnak, just to give a brief overview of the work of the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force, and to speak a little bit about the rationale for one of our limited set of recommendations. It was actually our first actionable item, which was that the town should immediately create and issue a proclamation regarding systemic racism and its impact in Fairfield. I want to just thank the RTM for being open to this discussion, for the opportunity to talk to you a bit and answer any questions the representatives might have about what we did. The report is pretty detailed. I encourage everyone to read it carefully if you've not done so. Just a brief overview. There was always some confusion about the charge of the task force. We were quite limited in our, parameters of what we were supposed to create. We were charged with creating a action plan for the town, deliverable to the Board of Selectmen, on recommendations regarding the impact of racial issues or racial bias in Fairfield, with specific actionable items for town governance. So we were not, just to be clear, charged with creating a forum for discussion or for response to racially charged events in town, much sometimes to the frustration of the community and members who are of the community who are affected by those incidents. One of the clear recommendations you'll note in the report was that there be a permanent commission to replace our temporary commission to really field the broad range of issues that affect racial issues that affect citizens in Fairfield. Just briefly, we had a volunteer commission. We were looking at existing data of town governance. We pretty quickly found out there's not a lot of existing data in town about disparate outcomes of policies and so forth, which really highlights a bit of the dilemma we are in. We were asked to establish that there were impacts of systemic racism in Fairfield, but actually we have not named that issue enough to make it an issue that's measured or tracked or really discussed routinely in town departments. There's a sort of a scattershot approach to these issues. So we looked at best practices across a number of other organizations, other towns. There's a pretty exhaustive or expansive literature on what other communities have done to address these issues. What we kept coming back to when we looked at best practices is that the number one step in every case that we reviewed was that the town needed to name the issue, or the community, the municipality needed to name the issue. So you'll see in the Connecticut Council of Municipalities, the National League of Cities, the Kellogg Foundation, look at any number of these sort of overviews and broad reports. The most important step highlighted in almost all of them is that the town leadership, not just the town leadership needs to make a clear statement that racism is a systemic issue in the community. And many of these recommendations highlighted the need to specify that it's a public health crisis. I can speak, happen to be a clinical psychologist. I have an interest in the long-term impact of marginalization and what we call trauma, or sort of low-level trauma that happens with great frequency. And we know pretty clearly now that those sorts of experiences repeated over and over again have a very negative impact on people who have to endure that. So I'm particularly concerned about those issues. But I guess the item for discussion tonight is the nature of that proclamation. We have, again, if you're not aware, we've delivered this blueprint to the Board of Selectmen. There's not really been a public hearing on it up till now. We've heard that there's little interest in issuing a proclamation about this, although there's no formal response to that. So again, Ryan and I are both quite appreciative, the whole task force is, that the RTM is willing to have this discussion. Why make a proclamation? And I'll just speak briefly and then hand it over to Ryan. again, to me, the most important function of a proclamation is that it puts a stake in the ground and says, this is an issue that the town is committed to. It's committed to measuring it, tracking it, examining it, speaking about it. It is sort of a interesting privilege of being sort of the majority in town, that we don't have to do this, we don't choose to. But just because some people may not think this is important, you have to really ask, who is it not important to, or to whom is it actually very important that we name what's going on here? So we need to make a proclamation, in our opinion, to secure a commitment from the town, to really establish data and metrics standards for not just for hiring, although this tends to get shunted into just HR discussions. It's really using a racial equity lens to look at every town governance decision. And the abiding overarching question is, does the decision we're considering right now have disparate impact on different communities? And right now we have very limited capacity to measure that. Issuing a proclamation is a statement from the top. It gives it credibility and significance that doesn't come if it's just a grassroots statement. It makes us accountable. It names the problem. And again, just in my work, if you can't name the issue you're working on, you can't deal with the issue you're working on. It has to be given a name. And it does set up, as I mentioned, the data system. One of the issues, then I'll hand this off to Ryan to give a broader overview of the blueprint. One of the things that keeps popping up is a flashpoint in this discussion is the issue of whether issuing a statement or a proclamation of the presence of systemic racism in Fairfield somehow implies that individuals in Fairfield are racist. And this is the challenge of communication. This is not just something that Fairfield's struggling with. Let me be very clear. We went to great lengths to try to clarify this in the report. These are not, any of these recommendations are not grounded in the belief that there is, a large number of racist activity or individuals in Fairfield. But these are hidden, systemic, long-standing, largely invisible forces that continue to have disparate impact on people who are in the minority in Fairfield. And we think it's very important to keep the focus on the systemic issues and not get distracted by the heat and the flash around whether or not we're implying any individual is racist or not. So again, delighted to be here. Happy to answer any questions. Ryan, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think you've really hit a lot of the main points. I will add that the state of Connecticut has passed a similar resolution in June of this past year, and a growing number of other towns across the state are passing resolutions that signal the work and the priority that they have within their town to address racial equity. And I think, a resolution is not something that has embedded within it specific actions. It's more an announcement. It's a beginning point of where, you're making a statement about your commitment as a town to address racial equity. And it's important, as Doug said, to do that at the outset of this work. The town has expressed already by creating a task force and asking for a blueprint and, doing that in an open way and engaging different parts of the community in this conversation who many citizens are working towards racial equity in many different forums that we looked at, including housing and education, community groups, social service, and so forth. But a resolution is a very important announcement and statement about the position that the town takes. And it has the potential to really open up meaningful dialogues with people of color. It sends a very strong signal that the town wants to be open about what exists and to address it in whatever ways are appropriate, and to collect the information. And I'll follow up by saying too that a resolution is not enough in itself. It's a great starting point, but certainly a commission, a DEI officer, to continue the work and to work closely with the departments and the first selectman and the RTM to continue to address things as they come up. And thank you for taking this up. We're really very, very excited that this is happening.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the body? Representative Zesma.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Liz Esma, District 4. I just want to thank Doug and Ryan and other members of the task force who are not with us for the extraordinary work that you've done. The blueprint was really amazing, and I am looking forward to us implementing the recommendations that you made. You know, there's a community counting on us to do that right here in Fairfield, and I think also the rest of the state is looking at towns like ours, you know, who may not have taken action yet. But can you just give me some idea of, I mean, it might be a rhetorical question, but what would the implications be of not implementing at least a number of your recommendations?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. Maintaining the status quo, I guess, would be the greatest risk, that we continue to minimize the impact of this. I mean, what we heard pretty clearly when we gave people an opportunity or an option to come forward and speak about this, there's a lot of distress and pain in town that's not being, the people don't feel comfortable speaking about. So I do think choosing to not name this and to move forward with the recommendations means that we'll continue to ignore this and continue to marginalize and silence people who are really struggling. And I think as leaders, we want to be out in front of these issues, not sort of just trying to push them aside and letting someone else deal with them. Ryan, I don't know if you have another point of view on that. But.
Oh, I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think if, you know, as you go through the blueprint, you know, there are a number of recommendations in each of the areas, just as a jumping off place. It was really meant to be something that a commission could take and would not have to start from ground one. You know, this is a place where you can begin to do this work. The impact of not doing it, I think every one of those recommendations has an implication, you know, for not doing it. And also I think it sends a strong signal in terms of where we are. Somebody mentioned modernization of our town. You know, to say that we're not addressing this head on is quite head in the sand, you know, for lack of a better way of saying it. This is something that it's not new, but it's certainly is on the front of mind for many communities and is a very important and relevant issue. And even though we are majority white town, our population is changing, even, you know, it's changing across the country, and it's changing in Fairfield as well. You know, we'll continue to see that change in the future. So
thank you, Ryan. You kind of touched on something I was going to say, and that is in the interest of transparency and modernization, if you will. These initiatives, I would hope, would put us on the map as a welcoming place for all communities in this state or people moving in from out of state. And I very much support them. And I want to thank you both again very much for your time and your hard work.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Representative Zesma. Representative Wackerman?
Karen Wackerman, District 7. I want to add my thanks to you, Ryan and Doug, and the whole task force for your hard work. I know it was a lot of work. And I want to thank you, Doug, for commenting on the term systemic racism, because I think that is something that people often feel feel like it's an accusation. And I think it's really helpful to explain what it really is. It's sort of an unconscious, very embedded situation. And I hope my fellow RTM members will approve this. I think it's a really important first step, and I hope we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wackerman. Any other comments, Representative Vergara?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jill Vergara for District 7. Thank you so much, Ryan and Doug, and Sharon and Marcy for raising and working on this resolution. I think that it's so important for us to pick this up and to vote on this and support it. I read through the task force summary, and there was a recommendation. I was wondering if it's been implemented that the Charter Review Commission form a subcommittee to review things with a racial equity and justice lens. Do you know whether that's been done yet?
As far as I know, there has not been a separate committee. We did send some information to the Charter Committee, I believe at one point, to highlight some areas that could be addressed. The town seal being one of them. And I think there were a couple of other things, but as far as I know, there was not a subcommittee to address that.
Okay, thank you. Because certainly when we're talking about systemic racism and we're talking about structures, the way we structure ourselves as in our government structures has a huge impact on things. And I think that it's a really important area to be looking at and ensure that we're not negatively impacting certain communities, especially minority communities. So thank you very much for mentioning that in your report.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Representative Vergara. Any other comments or questions from the body? All right. Well, I don't see any others. So thank you, Doug and Ryan, for coming tonight. And thank you for the time commitment you give the town on this important project for the town.
Our pleasure. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. All right. That's it for tonight. We're going to move into our committee meetings now. Everybody hopefully has the phone number to dial in. And I'll see.
Thanks, Mark.
I'll see our group there, and we'll see everybody on the 25th.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Adios.
Good night, thank you.
Thanks.